I could record it. I'll record it.
Okay. Who is a free person? Whoever studies Torah, whoever lives by the Torah. You know, when everyone is marching for freedom, but when the Jewish people left Egypt, Moshe said, let my people go so that they shall serve me. In other words, freedom is not just a physical state. It's not enough just to let my people go, even though they were in servitude. The real freedom is internal freedom. When a person has the freedom to check your impulses, to override your baser tendencies, that's what makes a person free. A person who has discipline, self-control, a person who's moral, who's ethical, who's spiritual, who's godly, that's true freedom. Freedom is not an external thing, you know, otherwise it's like rearranging the deck in the Titanic. You know, whether you move here or you sit there, the ship is going down. You know, that was the problem with all the communists and all the socialists, and they thought that we were going to redeem the world by rearranging the deck in the Titanic, steal from rich and give it to the poor. Now the poor become the rich, you know, the apparatchiks become the new rich, and everyone else becomes poor. Of course, it's not how you change society. It's not how you improve the world. The only way to change and to improve is when you make an internal change. That's hard and that's difficult, but when you change something inside your own life, if you're able to improve your own life, you're able to be kinder and more generous and you know, make a dent in your own characteristic, personality trait, instead of being narcissistic and self-centered, you learn to think of others, and you learn to be kind and good. That's how you change the world. Now, that's not so romantic or that's not so dramatic, but that is the real change, and that's the only change, you know, from within. Genuine change, a change in your behavior, an improvement in your behavior, in how you speak and how you act and how you think. It's just what's going on now is just so shocking. As if this is how, you know, this is how you're going to change when there's horrible murder, by murdering other people and by disrespecting and vandalizing. And it's just shocking. What's more shocking is all the people are rooting for it, as if this is somehow something wonderful and good. Anything good can come out of this toxic environment. You know, this is one of the things that the Talmud describes at the end of Tractate of Sotah. At Chabad, we have a custom. The Sotah has 49 pages, so one page for each day, which we study between Pesach and Shavuot, the 49 days of the Omer. So the Talmudic pages start with page 2. So it's really, we start in the second day of the Omer, and we conclude it right before Shavuot. So we'll make a proper siyum when we get back at the Kollel next week. But we'll discuss this Talmudic tractate. In the very last page, he discusses the signs of Mashiach coming, the total disintegration, immorality and total disintegration of society and of the so-called higher houses of learning. He describes the leadership. He says the leaders will be like the dogs, the pnei hader ki pnei hakelev. Why like a dog? Why are you comparing the leaders to a dog? The dog goes ahead, but it's on a leash. The dog is constantly looking back to see where the masters, even though it appears to be as if the dog is leading, is a leader, but really the dog is just on a leash. You know, you have the type of leadership who pander to the lowest common denominator, to the basis, to the raw hatred and evil, and fan the flames and pour kerosene on the fire and take polls to see there's no backbone, there's no sense of right and wrong. Instead of truly leading and standing up with moral indignation, when in the name of so-called justice you murder and vandalize and do these horrible things and beat up people, and all in the name of so-called justice, instead of having a leader that has a backbone that can stand up and cry out and say that You know, something is immoral. One immorality doesn't lead to another immorality. If you're fighting for justice, you're fighting for the horrible murder of one human being. The answer is not to go and murder another human being, or to steal, or to vandalize, or to terrorize. It's just shocking. I mean, it's just, and the police were told to stand down in city after city after city. It's just to see. I mean, it's just hard to believe. But this is what happens when you don't have Torah. You have no morality, and you have no guide. You have no blueprint. You know, the Torah is the blueprint for life. When there's nothing higher, nothing greater, when everything is about ego, and everything is about power, and everything is about arrogance, and there's absolutely not a shred of genuineness, of humility, of godliness, of it's just really, it's really sad to see. But this is what happens. We studied in the Daf Yomi today that in Tractate Shabbos, page 89, we're studying, by divine providence, we're studying about what happened at Mount Sinai. So it says that God gave the Torah on the sixth day of Sivan. And even according to Rabbi Yossi, it was meant to give on the sixth day, Moshe on Friday, but Moshe added a day. And Hashem said, when he created the world, he made a condition. He says, if the Jewish people are going to receive the Torah, then I will sustain the world. Otherwise, the world will revert back to absolute nothingness, to chaos. And that's what we're seeing today. Without Torah, without a moral compass, without a sense of humility, without a sense of truth and genuineness, absolute truth, that's what we have today. Total anarchy, total chaos. I mean, the only excuse for democracy, the only excuse for government is the only reason people give up their rights, their personal, individual rights, because the government will protect them. But when you see a time like this, for 7 nights and days, and the government did nothing to protect its own citizens and let these violence go on without stop, and the only ones who ended up in the hospitals were police and innocent bystanders, then there's no government. This is just anarchy. This is total chaos. The world is reverting to absolute total chaos, meaninglessness. So this is what happens without Torah. It's unfolding and playing right before our very eyes. We're having a live demonstration of the total bankruptcy of all these isms that have thrown Hashem overboard. And there's absolutely no sense of godliness, and no sense of truth, and no sense of morality, and no sense of ethics, and no sense of humility and care for another person, genuine care for another person. And anyway, it's just it's just right so close to the giving of the Torah. We're giving a live example. Hashem is giving us a live demonstration of this is what happens. A world without Torah reverts back to absolute nothingness, meaninglessness, and void. But let's discuss something that the Talmud, the Tractate Sotah, discusses right at the beginning of the Tractate. And it says, when the Torah discusses the woman, the whole Tractate is about the woman, a Sotah, who's suspected of adultery. She was warned that she should not seclude herself with a certain individual, and she was warned, and then she goes ahead and secludes herself with that individual. We don't know, did she commit adultery? Didn't she commit adultery, even though it sounds like probably she did, because she was warned about this individual person in front of 2 witnesses, and then she went ahead in front of 2 witnesses and secluded herself with this person enough time that she could have committed adultery. So we have very strong suspicions that she did commit adultery, but nevertheless, we don't have any proof. So she would go through this process of this Sotah. She would be taken to the temple, and she would drink this water, and this bitter water. And if she was innocent, she was blessed. She can live again with her husband. And if not, she and her lover, wherever he was in the world, at that very same moment, they would both die a grotesque death. And this only, of course, happened if the husband was in a very high moral level. The husband never once sinned in his life, never once did any sexual immorality in his life,
And therefore, this only happened in the times of the temple, and the Jews were in a very, very high level. Even at the end of the Second Temple, they suspended this whole procedure, because at that point the men were not on that high level, so they didn't deserve this. This whole thing was a divine, miraculous thing. So the Torah begins this whole discussion of the Sotah. Actually, this week's Torah portion is coming up, Parshas Nasi. And the Torah starts out, Isha ki sishta. Sishta, the Talmud says, sishta comes from the word in Hebrew, the root word is sishta shtus. If she will do something that's completely insane, irrational. And the Talmud says, a person doesn't sin unless they have a moment of insanity. We complete insanity. Now, the simple meaning is, when a person sins, we do things that are foolish. We do many things that are foolish, and later on we look back and we say, what was I thinking? This was so ridiculous. I'm such a smart person. What did I do? But at the time, in the heat of the moment, we're so eager to sin, and we're so tempted to sin, that we don't think. We don't think ahead. We don't think of the consequences. We just dive right in, and we do foolish things. On a deeper level, the Talmud is telling us that a person doesn't sin unless they have a moment of insanity, lapse of judgment. And in the Tanya, he explains, Hasidus explains, that really it's not even possible for a Jew to sin. It says in the Zohar, in the book of Leviticus that we read, it says, a soul that will sin, nefesh kisechta. So the Zohar says the proper way to read this is with a question mark. Nefesh kisechta? A Jewish soul could sin? How is it even possible? And there are 5 names for the soul. Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chaya Yechida. Nefesh is the lowest level of the soul. And even the lowest level of the soul, the face that interfaces with the body, and that refers to the person's actions and thought and speech and thought, even that level, the Torah says, how can a Jew sin? Because if you're so connected with godliness, if you're so connected with Hashem, how could you disconnect yourself? When you sin, you are disconnected. Being Jewish means so much to us. If it's so important in our lives that we're ready to make the ultimate sacrifice, if the anti-Semite puts a gun to a Jew's head, any Jew, and tells him, gives him the option, bow down to the idol, kiss the cross, or lose your life, a Jew would rather be burnt alive than bow down to the idol and kiss the cross. That's what Jews have done throughout the ages. It's not an option for us to deny my Jewishness. You're asking me to deny my Jewishness? It's simply not an option. A modern day example of this, one of the members in our community told us that his family is very, very assimilated, and very highly educated, and very wealthy, intermarried, everything. And the family would get together for the Seder, the whole family, 40, 50 people. And I think this individual posed the question to his family. He said, let me ask you a question. God spoke to you and he told you, I'm giving you a choice. You have an option. You can be richer than Bill Gates, but on one condition. You have to deny and give up your Jewishness. Would you take that choice? You could be richer than Bill Gates. You're worth over $100 billion, richest man on earth. But on one condition, you have to give up your Jewishness, deny your Jewishness. He says, there wasn't a single person in the room who raised their hand. There wasn't a single person in that room, as far as they were, probably not even going to synagogue on Yom Kippur, yet they were not ready to give up their Jewishness. So we see that being Jewish means so much to us, that we're ready to make the ultimate sacrifice. You're ready to give up $100 billion not to give up your Jewishness. You're ready to die for your Jewishness. It means that much to each and every Jew alive today, 14 million Jews. When push comes to shove in the moment of truth, being Jewish is my core, my essence. It's the most important thing in my life. And that's a fact. The proof is in the pudding. So how could you sin? Every time you sin in the real sense, you're giving up your Jewishness. You're denying your Jewishness. You're denying your relationship with Hashem, which is why the Torah tells us this idea, this concept, that a Jew doesn't sin unless he has a moment of insanity. Where does the Torah teach us this? In the case of the Sotah, there are many sins. There's 365 sins. Why does the Torah choose the sin of the Sotah, the story of the Sotah, to teach us this lesson about all sin? That all sin, any time a Jew sins, any sin, even the most minor sin, is a lapse, is a moment of insanity. Because the Torah is explaining to us why it's a moment of insanity. Because Mount Sinai, as the Mishnah says in Tractate of Kindness, the last Mishnah, that the day of the marriage, Mount Sinai was the marriage of the Jewish people and Hashem. And therefore, for a Jew to sin, this is an act of unfaithfulness. This is an act of adultery. How could we be unfaithful to Hashem? If we're so related to Hashem and so connected to Hashem, we're married to Hashem. Every time we sin, we go against Hashem's will, Hashem's expressed will. We are being unfaithful. And that is why it's a moment of insanity. How could you be unfaithful to Hashem? We're so connected, we're intimate with Hashem. Hashem chose us. We are His chosen people. He chose to be intimate with us. And God loves every human being, all 7 to 8 billion people, every last one of them. But they are God's best friend, like Noah. Noah was God's best friend. But God chose Abraham and his descendants to be His married. He married us. He chose us to be His marriage partner. And that's a different relationship. It's an intimate relationship. He's only intimate with one, exclusively. God's chosen people. And it's a two-way street. He's intimate with us and we're intimate with Him. So how is it possible for us to be unfaithful to Hashem? When we do sin, you're being unfaithful. And we know how important, how deeply it matters to us to be Jewish. Our relationship to Hashem means so much to us that we're ready to give up our lives in a moment of truth. Although logically it makes no sense. Because technically, when the anti-Semite holds a gun to your head and forces you to bow down to the idol or kiss the cross, that's not idolatry. Technically, it's not idolatry. Because the Gentile knows you despise him and you despise his idol. Even if you bow down, you're only doing it because you want to live, not because you're worshiping that idol or you're kissing it out of any reverence or love for that you despise. So technically, it's not even idolatry. But yet a Jew is so connected with Hashem, a Jew cannot separate himself from Hashem, that it's not even an option. It's like telling a married woman, well, just be unfaithful, just for one time, just for 1 minute, and then you'll do marriage therapy and you'll reconcile. What's the big deal? What's the big deal? It's not an option. I can't be unfaithful even for a minute. Even if the marriage could be salvaged. There are many marriages, unfortunately, there was adultery, and yet they salvaged the marriage, or they reconciled, or they went to therapy together, and they worked it out. But it's not an option. Because that relationship is so viable, that relationship is so alive, I can't do anything that will harm that relationship. So we know for a fact that being Jewish is so alive for us. It means much to us. It's not even an option for us to disconnect ourselves from Hashem. So how can we sin? Any sin. How can we be unfaithful? Well, it's a minor sin. What difference does it make? Every time I sin, the word sin in Hebrew, aveira, comes from the word, I've trespassed. I've disconnected myself from Hashem. How is that even possible? And that's why the Torah teaches us this idea of that sinning is an irrational act, is a moment of insanity by the woman, the Sotah. Because it's that unfaithfulness that explains why it's so irrational. And the Tanya goes a little deeper and explains, he says, why even a minor sin? It's just a minor sin. What's the big deal? I'm still Jewish. I'm still a proud Jew. So what's the big deal? So Now, the Rebbe explains that it's like the analogy of the human body and the soul, your life. We see that the body is completely egoless. The body is completely nullified to the soul, to your life. The body is unself-conscious. When you walk down the street, you don't feel that you're a bag of bones and veins and blood and sinew. You don't even feel yourself. A healthy person doesn't feel himself. If you feel yourself, if you're conscious of yourself, you know that you're ill, and you immediately check into a hospital. The sign of health is that the body is completely unself-conscious. The body merges with the soul. The body becomes one with the soul, inseparable from the soul. So much so that the body itself is alive. It's not like a machine. The soul is not a motor, and the body is a machine, and the motor moves the machine. No. Every cell in the body, all 37 trillion cells, every last cell is alive. You can see the difference between a live body and, unfortunately, a corpse. It's like a piece of clay. So the body itself is alive, and the body is so one with the soul. I don't know where the soul ends and the body begins. So much so, you want to move your hand. It's not like you have to stop and think, okay, I have to move my hand. Let me force my hand to move. The hand moves automatically. It doesn't even think. It's like a subconsciously, you just move. It's not a conscious decision that you have to make, and you have to go through different steps. It happens automatically. You want to move and you move. A healthy body is so tuned in with the soul that automatically it senses whatever the soul wants, whatever your life force wants. You want to move, you move. Immediately. It doesn't have to go through any long processes. Well, let me think about it. Your body is not being religious. Oh, my body is obedient. It's a very, very obedient body. It's very religious and pious. And the body chooses to listen to my soul. Let me think about it. Should I move my hand? You know what? I'm going to obey you, soul. You want to move? I'm going to move. No, the body is not religious. The body is completely one with the soul. It's like a chariot. It has no mind of its own. It's completely nullified, unself-conscious, completely one and inseparable with the soul. And if, God forbid, if you want your pinky to move and your pinky doesn't move, and you have a stroke, you're paralyzed, God forbid, something is wrong. Something is very, very wrong here. Because every part of your body, down to your toenail, when you want to do something, it does it. It doesn't have to command it, and it doesn't have to be obeyed. It's like the soul is superior and the body is on the bottom. The body and the soul are one and inseparable, and it's so tuned in. The moment, the split second you want to do it, you move automatically without even thinking. You don't have to think. It's not a conscious thought. You're not even aware of it automatically. You move. And the same is with us. We are the body and Hashem is our soul. Hashem is the soul. We are the microcosm. Hashem is the macrocosm. From our own personal experience, we can extrapolate that the same is true in the macrocosm. What's true in our personal experience, the body and soul, the whole world is a body and Hashem is the soul. Hashem is our soul. And what's the sign of health? The sign of health is if we are egoless, if we are unself-conscious, we are completely one and unified with Hashem. And therefore, we have 248 positive mitzvot corresponding to the 248 limbs in our body. Hashem wants every limb in our body to move. He wants us to put on tefillin. He wants us to give tzedakah. He wants us to do things, and we do it. And we do it automatically, of course. Hashem is my soul, and I am the body. I'm not even being religious. I'm like a chariot. It's not even an option otherwise. Whatever Hashem wants, that's exactly what I do. And 365 don'ts and 365 veins. So therefore, if you start making differentiations, well, the major things I'm going to do, the major mitzvah, the important mitzvahs I'm going to do, Shabbos, mikveh, the important mitzvahs I'm going to do, the minor mitzvahs, well, I can't be bothered. That distinction in itself is part of the foolishness, the insanity, the irrationality. It makes no sense. Doesn't matter if it's a pinky, if it's a heart. If you're a healthy body, then all 37 trillion cells, every fiber of your being, every bone in your body, every ounce, every inch of you, every part of you feels the same way. You're connected with your soul. You're inseparable from your soul. And automatically, when your soul wants something, automatically your body responds. You're so tuned in. I don't know where the soul ends and the body begins. There's a body-mind connection. So the moment you start making a differentiation, you say, well, my pinky doesn't matter. I only do the important things. Imagine someone coming to the doctor and saying, listen, imagine you coming to the doctor telling you have aches and pains, and probably the doctor, listen, your heart is healthy, nobody is perfect, you got to compromise on your health. Everyone we know is sick, has their aches and pains and their ailments. Don't be silly, be an adult, don't be a child, don't try to be perfect, nobody is perfect, go home. Okay, as long as your heart is healthy. Your hands are falling apart, your feet are falling apart, every other part of your body is falling apart. Okay, you would fire the doctor in a second. You don't compromise on a pinky, on a toenail. You want to be perfect. You want to be absolutely healthy, 100%. I'm not compromising on one single ache and pain. And you're right. Because that is the truth. There's no compromise. It's 100%. It is or it isn't. There's no 99%. Well, you have to, you can't. No, either you're healthy or you're not healthy. Either your soul is one with your body or not. So to start differentiating and distinguishing between a pinky or a minor mitzvah and a major mitzvah, well, minor mitzvahs don't matter, major mitzvahs are important, that in itself is a sign of the irrationality, of the foolishness, of the insanity. How can you make a distinction? Like saying, well, if my pinky doesn't work, that's fine. If your pinky doesn't work, you're a cripple. But every other part of my body is working. No. Your whole organism is one. You want to be 100% healthy without compromising any aspect. And the same is our approach to Yiddishkeit. God is absolute. Emes is absolute. Judaism is absolute. Torah is absolute. Being Jewish is absolute. It's not 99.9%. There's no compromise. It is or it isn't. It's real or it's not real. It's genuine or not. If it's for real, then every single mitzvah is for real. If a convert comes and says, well, I want to convert, but I'm only going to accept 612 mitzvah, he can't be a convert. But I'm only going to slice off a pinky. Yeah, slice off a pinky, I'm sorry. We're not slicing off any pinkies. It's a package deal. It is or it isn't. It's real or it's not real. The body is nullified to the soul or it's not. The body is egoless or not. So the moment the person sins and disconnects himself from Hashem, that's an act of insanity. It makes absolutely no sense on any level. And the only reason we do it is because in that moment of insanity, we plead insanity. In that moment of insanity, we think to ourselves, of course I'm Jewish. I'm a proud Jew. It means the world to me. But I'm still Jewish. Just because I sin, so what? Especially if it's a minor sin. I'm still Jewish. I'm still connected. Without realizing that every sin, even the most minor sin, is really a disconnect. But the Torah tells us that when the Jew sins, the Torah likens the Jew to the Sotah, the woman, the Sotah, that she secluded herself. And she was alone with a stranger. And it was an immoral act. Being alone with a stranger, especially after being warned, in itself is an immoral act. But then she drinks the water, and she's cleansed, and she's purified. And not only does she go back to her husband, the water establishes that she never committed adultery. Although she was secluded, she never committed adultery. Not only that, the Torah promises that she will be blessed. If she had difficulties in childbirth and labor, Now all her births will be smooth. So the Torah is telling us that when a Jew sins, the Torah is also telling us what happens at the end. A Jew sins, ultimately Hashem promises, Hashem says, that deep down the Jew can never truly commit adultery. A Jew deep down can never truly sin. Even when you sin, our hearts are with Hashem. Deep, deep, deep down inside, we remain 100% Jewish. And we remain 100% committed to Hashem. And our love for Hashem is undiminished, even when we sin. It's a moment of insanity. It's superficial. It's very superficial. That's why a Jew is so guilt-ridden when he sins. Because a Jew can never sin wholeheartedly. Because deep down inside, even when we sin, we remain 100% connected with Hashem, faithful to Hashem, loyal to Hashem. And that is why we are married to Hashem. And that is what this exile is compared to, because it's a severe test of this marriage. God married us at Sinai, and then we went into exile, and this harsh and long exile. And it appears to be as if the Jewish people have disconnected themselves from Hashem and run after all these false isms, one ism after the other, many of them invented by us. And this was our gift to the world. But the truth is, deep down, deep down inside, even when a Jew sins, he remains loyal and faithful, which is why we had the explosion of the Baal Tshuva movement in our generation, where hundreds of thousands of Jews who did not have the benefit of a positive and meaningful Jewish education, without a single positive and meaningful Jewish experience in their life due to no fault of their own, after being cut off for 3 generations, and yet hundreds of thousands of Jews rediscovered their Judaism with a vengeance, because the flame, the spark, that ember never ever is extinguished. A Jew is a Jew is a Jew. Even when a Jew sins, he's secluded with the foreign isms and strange isms and wild and chaotic and distorted isms. Deep down inside, the Torah is telling us that a Jew never ultimately commits adultery. It's not possible. A Jew always remains connected, and therefore we always have not only the possibility of doing teshuvah, it's inevitable that we'll do teshuvah. And not only will a Jew be restored back to Hashem, we're going to restore that intimacy and restore that relationship with the coming of Mashiach, but that relationship will be even deeper, more intense. She will be blessed. She will be even better than before, stronger than before, and be openly blessed. If she had problems in labor and childbirth, now everything will be smooth. She'll be blessed with children, will have a bris, with a redemption that will be unchanging and unyielding, a total and complete redemption. And that is also the ultimate reason for the exile. The ultimate reason for this harsh exile and long and bitter exile is ultimately just to prove that truth, that despite everything, despite appearing to be consciously disconnected from Hashem, unfaithful and unloyal to Hashem, and yet, after everything is said and done, the Jew and every last Jew, all 70,000 Jews living in the Upper East Side, every last Jewish man, woman, and child, every last Jew, 14 million plus Jews all over the world, every last Jew, every last child of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and every last daughter of Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah will return home, will reconnect with Hashem. It's a promise, it's inevitable, it's not even an option, it's not even possible any other way, because since the truth is, the absolute truth is that every Jew remains connected with Hashem, that truth will inevitably emerge and surface in all its glory and all its strength. And that's what's happening now, and it will happen now. This is a promise. It's not even an option. It's inevitable. Because that relationship will assert itself. That truth will assert itself, because that is the ultimate truth. That is the absolute truth. And that truth is unchanging and unyielding. So the whole sin is just a temporary lapse, a temporary moment of insanity. We'll look back and shake our heads. What were we thinking? What happened? How is this even possible? It's so absurd. For a Jew to sin is an absurdity. It's absolutely ridiculous. It makes no sense on any level, because deep down we don't want to sin. Deep down we all want to do the right thing. We want to do the truth. And ultimately, we recognize that truth. And that truth will emerge. The Torah never changes. Not one letter in the Torah, not one mitzvah in the Torah, not one truth in the Torah. The Jew never changes. We're the same Jew today as the Jew that stood at Sinai, as the Jew that stood at the splitting of the Jordan River, as the Jew that stood in the temple with all the prophets. We are the very same Jew. At the core and essence, the Jew hasn't changed. Essential things don't change. Superficial things change. But that neshama, that chelek elokami mal mamish, that core essence of godliness, it's located at the very center of our being, each and every one of us. That has never changed, and that will never change, and that inevitably will emerge and surface in all its beauty and all its astounding glory. And that's a promise. And then, when that happens, when Mashiach comes, then we'll look back and we'll see, we'll understand why we had to go through the exile, because it's the exile, when everything appeared lost, when so many Jews appear so lost, so disconnected, so clueless, and yet every last one of us will reconnect. This proves that this marriage is real, that what happened at Mount Sinai wasn't just an accident because we were isolated in the desert, but it's eternal. It's an absolute connection, and nothing and no one could sever that connection. Not even ourselves. Even we don't have the freedom of choice to disconnect ourselves, ultimately. It's only on the surface. Yes, we can wreak havoc, we can cause a lot of damage, we can cause a lot of pain, we cause Hashem to go into exile. But it's an exile. Exile means that you're intact. You're in exile. You're locked up. But you haven't changed. It's just you're in exile. The circumstances are bitter and harsh. But you are present, and you will be redeemed from exile. The core and essence hasn't changed. It's dormant. It's buried. It's hidden. But it's there. Intact. Whole. Untouched. Unvarnished. Unsoiled, untainted. And that purity will emerge and surface. And when we do teshuvah, then all the sins and negativity itself will transform into mitzvah. That negative experience now will turn into a positive experience, and the woman is blessed, and she returns to her husband, and she's restored. The intimacy is restored, and the love is restored to even a deeper level, a greater level, a higher level than ever before. All as a result of all that negative, traumatic experience that the woman, the Sotah, had to go through. So this whole traumatic exile and the spiritual exile, the physical exile is just a symptom of the spiritual exile. When we soil ourselves, soil our souls, and all that trauma that we bring upon ourselves and on the universe and on Hashem himself, all that will only lead us to the ultimate reunion and ultimate proof of the sanctity of this marriage, the truth of this marriage, the truth and the depth of this relationship. And so that's why it's all contained. And then we'll come to Sotah, Sishta. Shtus means irrational, but there could be two irrationalities. There could be a negative irrationality, like what's been going on for the last 7 days, anarchy. But then you have a holy irrationality that comes from holiness, total devotion, total dedication, a love that's so intense, that's so powerful, that's so deep. Nothing could shake that love. And that holiness and that holy relationship and connection that a Jew has to Hashem, that total devotion, absolute dedication, absolute connection, will permeate our consciousness. And we'll feel that and experience that with every fiber of our being and every bone in our body as we become intimate with Hashem. And this will happen with the coming of Mashiach, when the wife and the Jewish people will be reunited with Hashem, when we are purified with the Sotah waters, and we will come out strengthened and blessed. And may Hashem help that all of this should happen now. There's no better time than now, because we're still under the influence and impression of Shavuot, the holiday of Shavuot, as in the times of the temple, the Torah says a Jew had to bring 3 sacrifices. When he came to the temple on the holiday of Shavuot, he had to offer 3 sacrifices. 1 burnt offering and 2 joyful offerings, peace offerings. And since Shavuot is 1 day, the Torah gave another 6 days. We have 6 days to complete these sacrifices. And although you're allowed to bring these sacrifices on the first day, on Shavuot itself, on the holiday, yet the Jewish people would bring it after. They didn't want to bring it on the holiday itself, so they would bring it after the holiday and for the next 6 days. So we're not saying Tachanun, we're still under the influence of Shavuot. And Shavuot wasn't just the giving of the Torah. Shavuot was the marriage of the Jewish people and Hashem. Mount Sinai was a revelation of godliness like there's never been before. And that was a taste of Mashiach. Mashiach will be a revelation of godliness. And that's why there's no greater time, there's no better time than now to demand from Hashem, to yearn, to storm heaven and earth, to push hard, not to riot, but to demonstrate in a peaceful way, but in a forceful way, to demonstrate to Hashem and say, enough is enough. Enough of exile. Enough of suffering. Enough of evil. Enough of negativity. Enough of sickness and illness. Enough of exile. Enough of Hashem being in exile. Enough of the whole universe being so upside down. It's time. It's high time that there should be a change. This is what we should be demonstrating. The Jewish people should be demonstrating in the streets, peaceful demonstrations, demonstrating to Hashem and saying, we've had it with the exile. We're 1,950 years in exile. 3,332 years since the giving of the Torah, since Hashem betrothed us at Sinai. We're waiting for him to consummate the marriage. Don't you think it's time? You've kept us hanging for 3,332 years. You think it's time to go to the chuppah? You think it's time to consummate this marriage? What are we waiting for? Enough is enough. At Masai, genug schön, enough. This is the time. Maybe this is a signal for us in a positive way. There's time for us to start demonstrating, peaceful demonstrations, demonstrating to Hashem. Maybe the Jewish people should gather all over the world and demonstrate and cry out to Hashem, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, Hashem, enough is enough. It's high time for a change. It's high time to bring Mashiach. You promised us. You promised us in your Torah. You swore to us. It's in the 10 Commandments. Thou shalt not swear falsely. It's your obligation and your responsibility. The Jewish people have been faithful to you through thick and thin, fire and water, exile, crusades, Order de Fez, Chmielnicki, pogroms, Holocaust, intifadas, virulent anti-Semitism. And yet the Jewish people have remained faithful to you and loyal to you and connected to you and feel and experience this relationship and this marriage that we have with Hashem, which is why we are doing all of this, why we're studying Torah, why we're doing mitzvot, why are we acting Jewish, why are we speaking Jewish, why are we thinking Jewish? Because we're married to Hashem. This relationship is alive and real for us. So it's time for Hashem to reciprocate. It's time for Hashem to show us his hand. Enough with hiding, enough with concealment. It's time to remove this insanity, because exile itself is insanity. For a Jew to be in exile is an act of insanity. As the Talmud says in the beginning of Tractate Brachos, like we learn, exile is compared to a prince that was exiled from the table of his father. Where does a Jew belong? A Jew is a prince and a princess. They belong at their father's table in the third temple. What's a Jew doing in exile? Why are Jews sitting in exile? What right do Jews have to be in exile? How can Hashem allow us for another second, another moment for a Jew, his princes and his princess to sit in exile? In exile is insane. Exile is so unnatural. So why continue this insanity? There's no change. We should be demonstrating in the streets, peaceful demonstrations, but very forceful. There is no change. We're learning, we're davening, we're doing everything Hashem expects of us and more and beyond. The fact that Jews are still faithful and loyal to Hashem after 1950 years, our temple destroyed, He took away all the tzaddikim from us. And Jews are still talking about Mashiach, talking about redemption, thinking about redemption, speaking of redemption. And yet, there's no budging, no movement, no change. Hashem hasn't budged an inch. He won't give in. He's stubborn. He won't give in. He's not giving us what we need and what we want and what He needs. We're praying every day and demanding. And yet our prayers are unanswered. They're answered. No. Hashem says, no, I'm not bringing Mashiach. Not yet. That's not an answer. Whatever happens in this world is just a reflection of what's really happening in heaven. Maybe heaven is telling us it's time for the Jews to take to the streets in a peaceful demonstration and cry out. Millions of Jews who take to the streets and cry out to Hashem and say, enough is enough. It's time. We want Mashiach now, and we're not playing games. Every day that the exile continues, spiritual death is much worse than physical death. Another Jew intermarries. Another Jew is lost. This is spiritual death. This is spiritual suicide. That's more painful than physical death. It's intolerable. It's unacceptable. And Hashem allows this to continue. It's time to call in the National Guard. It's time to call in the heavenly souls to demonstrate with us and cry out to Hashem. All the heavens and the heavens of heavens, everyone together, every Jewish soul that ever lived should be demonstrating and marching in the heavens. We want Mashiach now. It's time to stop this insanity. Enough. Enough of not answering our prayers. Enough of not responding to our prayers. Enough. How many Jews had to live such beautiful lives? How many tzaddikim? How many 6 million holy martyrs is not enough to bring Mashiach? That Mashiach didn't come in 1940s when 6 million Jews said Shema Yisrael is one of the mysteries of the universe. That didn't melt the heavens and the earth. And that Hashem didn't bring Mashiach immediately. And here we are, 80 years later. No movement, no change. We're still in exile. This is after everything was done, everything was said and done, after 1950 years of such dedication and such a devotion and such loyalty to Hashem. And this is what we end up with. This is the bottom line. No change, no movement. Mashiach hasn't come. Here we are, sitting on the Upper East Side of Manhattan instead of sitting on the Upper East Side of Jerusalem, overlooking the Third Temple. What happened to Hashem's promises? All of His promises. He didn't even start fulfilling the smallest of His promises. So maybe heaven is telling us it's time for us to demonstrate in a peaceful way. Jews should gather and say, that's it. We're not going to stop. We're not going to relent until Hashem responds, yes. We are more stubborn than Him. We are His children. Children supersede their parents. We get our stubbornness from Hashem, but we are more stubborn than Him. So we're not relenting until this madness stops. The madness of exile has to stop. And that's all we can do. We can cry to Hashem. It's in Hashem's hands. The ball is in Hashem's court. It's up to Him. He has to make His move. After 3,800 years since Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, the patriarchs and the matriarchs, every Jew that lived, every beautiful soul that lived, every Jew that said Shema Yisrael once in the morning and once in the evening, and right before they passed away, the last words on the Jew's lips is Shema Yisrael. Every Jewish soul, every spark, every star, Hashem looks at all of it together and all of us together, every Jew that ever lived, every Jew that's alive today, every Jew that will ever live. How can Hashem not be moved and stirred and respond to our prayer and just do it? Just say yes. Just do it. Bring Mashiach. Just do it. You'll be very happy. Hashem will be very happy if we force him to bring Mashiach. He wants us to push him and to force him, so to speak, to bring Mashiach. So this is our prayer, that the madness should end in our own personal lives. We should end the madness in our lives. We recommit to do Jewish, to speak Jewish, to think Jewish, because any sin, any disconnect is an act of insanity. It violently opposes our truth, our core, our essence, that godly spark. It's located at the very center of our being. And we also ask Hashem to end the madness of exile, to end this madness of keeping Jews in exile and keeping the world in exile. And we're confident that Hashem will grant our prayer. And when we demonstrate and forcefully demand from Hashem, it's time to make a change. It's time to shake things up. We can't just continue as if everything is normal. It's not normal. We went through this whole coronavirus just to go back to the way things were before. We went through a Holocaust just to go back to the way things were before. We went through all of this just to go back to normal. It's not acceptable. We have to go to something better. So when Hashem sees the sincerity of our prayers, he will surely be moved and will surely answer us. And whether we deserve or we don't deserve, who cares? At this point, it doesn't matter. At this point, after 3,800 years, surely the Jewish people are so deserving. It's so deserving. And the fact that Jews are still loyal and faithful and think of redemption, feel connected, it's time for Hashem to do his part, to fulfill all of his promises and all of his oaths to us, as promised in this Torah. And the next session we'll have on the Upper East Side of Yerushalayim, together with 40 million Jews, we'll be dancing, overlooking the third Beis HaMikdash. Hashem will host us in his Chabad house, and we'll hold Grand Kiddush, the ultimate Kiddush, the Sher Abar, the Lev Yason, the Yayin HaMeshumar, and may Hashem answer our heartfelt prayers, and just say yes, and bring Mashiach now. If anyone has any questions, comments, thoughts, obviously you don't have to agree with anything that's said. Hello, Marlene. Oh, could you have to unmute yourself. Could you unmute yourself? Let's see.
I thought that was very beautiful. Thank you for sharing that with us. There's a lot of
Thank you.
confusion in the world, and we need that kind of strong leadership to bring us forward.
Thank you, Marlene. Oh, Rab Moshe, good to see you. Our Balkaire. I want to offer our condolences. Unfortunately, Rab Moshe lost his father, the virus, before Pesach. May be a good advocate for you and give him a lot of nachas. Dr. Rabbi, what do you think?
Sorry, I entered a little bit late, but I love the shir. A little chizuk goes a long way. Adds a little bit of sanity to the insanity or the unsanity.
Yeah, it's hard to believe what's going on. It's really shocking. Shocking, the total lack of leadership, of backbone. We discussed that in the beginning. Pnei Hadar, Pnei Hakela, the end of Sotah.
I like the metaphor that our body should be, we go to the doctor, we want 100%, including the pinky. So too, we should treat the mitzvot the same way. I love the metaphor.
Okay, coming from a doctor, that's powerful. Very nice. Okay, so our next Zoom class will be on Thursday, and we'll discuss how do you reconcile opposites. The end of Parshas Nasai, and so I want to wish you well. Hopefully, everything will calm down. Stay healthy, and all the best. Great to see you all.
Good night.
Good night.